My friends told me I deserved better. They were wrong. She deserved better. There's a difference and I learned it too late. The first lie I told wasn't to Colton. It was to myself, standing in Derek's kitchen on a Saturday night in October, holding a beer I didn't need, nodding along while he told me I was too good for the life I was living. That's where this actually starts. Not with a text, not with a touch, not with some dramatic crossing of a line I'd been eyeing for weeks. It starts with me nodding. It starts with me not saying anything when I should have said, "You don't know what you're talking about." I didn't say that. I took a sip of my beer and I let the idea root itself in me, and everything that came after grew from that one quiet, cowardly moment of agreement. Colton had been my fiancé for 7 months at that point. We'd been together for 4 years before the engagement. 4 years and 7 months of a life I had chosen, every single day, because it was good and real and because Colton was the kind of woman who made you feel like the world was a manageable place just by being in it. She was a third-grade teacher. She made lesson plans at the kitchen table on Sunday afternoons with a cup of chamomile tea and a yellow legal pad, old-fashioned about it in this way that I used to find charming and later, God help me, started to find boring. She went to bed at 10 on weeknights. She called her mom every Sunday. She cried at nature documentaries when animals died. She was the most genuinely kind person I had ever been close to in my life, and I want to be clear about that because it matters. This is not a story about a difficult woman. This is a story about a good woman and the man who decided goodness wasn't enough. Derek had been my best friend since college. He was the kind of man who confused movement with growth. New city every 2 years, new girlfriend every 6 months, new startup idea every quarter. He'd been in 3 serious relationships since I'd known him, and the story he told about each of them ended with him walking away because he deserved more, and everyone always agreed with him, and I agreed with him too, because it was easier than asking what exactly more was supposed to look like. Derek thought Colton was sweet. He said that word the way you'd say it about a golden retriever. Sweet. Like it was a nice quality for a person to have but not a reason to build a life with someone. Noah was Derek's version of a hype man. Whatever Derek thought, Noah thought louder. He'd never met a woman he didn't eventually find some fault with, and his fault with Colton was that she was too settled. Too comfortable. Not ambitious enough, he said once, like Colton's third-grade students were going to hear that assessment and feel real bad about the woman teaching them how to read. Noah had never been engaged. Noah had never been in a relationship longer than 14 months. Noah had opinions about my 4.5-year relationship the way a man who's never left his county has opinions about international travel. I listened to both of them for 8 months. I want to own that. Nobody held my head and forced me to absorb their nonsense. I listened because some part of me wanted permission, and they were offering it freely, and it was easier to let 2 guys at a bar hand me a narrative than to do the actual work of figuring out what was wrong with me. Because that's what was actually happening. Something was wrong with me. Not with Colton. With me. I had turned 31 in the spring and something had shifted that I didn't know how to name or address, this restless, crawling dissatisfaction that had nothing to do with Colton and everything to do with my own unexamined fear that my life was becoming its final shape. I looked at the apartment we shared, the wedding plans on the refrigerator, the future I had wanted and chosen, and I felt something I can only describe as trapped, except the trap was entirely of my own construction and I had walked into it voluntarily and locked the door behind me. Instead of recognizing that for what it was, a personal crisis that had nothing to do with her, I looked for a cause. And Derek and Noah handed me one with both hands. She deserved better than you. That's what I should have heard. That's what was actually true. But what they kept saying was, you deserve better than this. And I let those 2 sentences trade places in my head until I couldn't tell them apart. Kayla came back into my life in November. We'd dated for about 8 months in our senior year of college, nothing serious, nothing that ended badly, just one of those relationships that fades out when people graduate and move to different cities. We'd stayed loosely connected on social media for years. She liked my engagement announcement post. I thought nothing of it. And then she sent a DM in November that said she was in the city for a work conference and wanted to catch up if I was around, and I said sure, and I told Colton I was getting dinner with a college friend, and that was the first lie I told her, the first real one, the one that opened the door. Dinner with Kayla was 2.5 hours of being seen in a very specific way. She was sharp and funny and she asked about my work with the kind of focused attention that made me feel significant, and she laughed at my jokes with her whole face, and I drove home afterward feeling lit up in a way I immediately diagnosed as evidence of something missing in my relationship rather than evidence of novelty, which is what it actually was. I was confusing new with better. I was confusing excitement with meaning. I was 31 years old and I was making a category error a teenager could have spotted, and I kept making it for months. I didn't tell Derek and Noah about Kayla right away. But when I did, about 3 weeks later, after a second dinner and a conversation that went until midnight in a hotel bar, Derek looked at me with this expression like I'd finally done something right. He said, "See, that's what I'm talking about. That energy. That's what you're missing." And Noah nodded and I nodded and nobody said, "You're engaged to someone who loves you and you're sitting in a hotel bar with your college ex and calling it an energy problem." Colton noticed something was different. Of course she did. She was not oblivious. She was not the kind of woman who missed things. She noticed that I'd started going out more. She noticed the way I checked my phone sometimes in the evening when she was talking to me. She noticed that I was physically present but somewhere else in my head, which is its own form of abandonment. I understand that now, the way you can be in the same room with someone and still leave them. She asked me twice if everything was okay with us, and both times I said yes, absolutely, I'm just stressed with work, and both times she looked at me for a second longer than a comfortable pause and then nodded and dropped it, because that's who Colton was. She trusted me, she took me at my word, she didn't make scenes over feelings she couldn't prove. I repaid that trust by texting Kayla from the bathroom at Colton's parents' house on Thanksgiving. I want you to read that sentence again. I need you to understand the full shape of what I was doing. I was at the home of the woman who was going to be my mother-in-law, eating food that Colton's mom had spent 2 days preparing, sitting at a table with people who had accepted me as family, and I excused myself to the bathroom and texted another woman. That was who I had become. I didn't see it clearly at the time. I told myself it was just texting. I told myself nothing had happened, technically, which is the kind of logic that only works if you're willing to look past everything that's actually happening. The physical line got crossed in December. I'm not going to walk through the mechanics of it because they don't matter, and writing them out would just be a way of transferring the ugliness into your brain, and you don't need that. What matters is that it happened, and that after it happened I drove home and sat in my parked car in front of the building where Colton was asleep, and I felt, briefly and horribly, nothing. Just a kind of flat blankness, like a channel between stations. I thought I would feel something definitive. Guilt, relief, terror, certainty. I felt nothing, and the nothing scared me more than any of the other feelings I was prepared for. I went upstairs. Colton was asleep, exactly as I'd known she would be. She slept on her side facing the window, her hair spread out on the pillow in this way that I had looked at 1,000 nights and always found beautiful, and I stood in the doorway for a long moment looking at her, and the nothing just kept spreading and spreading inside me, and I couldn't find anything underneath it. I didn't stop. That's the part I find hardest to explain. I had that moment of standing in the doorway and looking at the woman I was supposed to marry and feeling the cold weight of what I'd done, and I still didn't stop. I kept seeing Kayla. I kept having dinner with Derek and nodding along when he told me I was finally figuring out what I wanted. I kept lying to Colton with increasing fluency, the way you get better at anything you practice. I started to understand that the lies were less about hiding something from her and more about hiding something from myself, because if I stopped lying I'd have to look at what I actually was, and I wasn't ready for that. Colton started planning the wedding in January. The venue, the caterer, the date. June of the following year. She was excited in this quiet, organized way, spreadsheets and color-coded folders, and she'd show me things sometimes, options, decisions that needed making, and I'd look at them and feel a sensation I can only describe as vertigo, like the ground was tilting, like I was watching a future I didn't have the right to anymore being assembled in careful columns right in front of me. I kept nodding. I kept saying yes to everything she showed me. I kept not saying the one true thing. What I should have said, if I had been a man with any courage or decency, was, stop. Something is wrong with me. I need to be honest with you before this goes any further. I should have come clean the night I stood in the doorway and felt nothing. I should have come clean before the venue was booked and the save the dates were designed and her mother had started calling her every week to talk about flowers. I didn't. I kept going. I kept choosing the easy thing over the right thing, over and over, the way you can roll a car slowly toward a cliff for so long that you stop registering how close you are to the edge. The way Colton found out was not dramatic. I need to tell you that, because in some part of my brain I had scripted a dramatic version, a confrontation where I was at least the active agent of my own destruction, and the actual version was so much smaller and sadder than that. Kayla texted my regular phone by mistake. She meant to use the number I'd given her for the secondary app we'd been using, and she typed the wrong contact, and the message landed on my regular phone, which was face up on the kitchen counter because I was home, and Colton was home, and I was in the shower. She didn't open it. She didn't have to. The preview text was enough. I came out of the shower and she was standing in the kitchen with her back to me, very still, looking at the counter. Not at the phone. Just at the counter. Her hands were at her sides. She wasn't crying. She wasn't shaking. She was just standing there with this absolute stillness that I had never seen from her before, not in 4.5 years, a stillness that had a quality to it, a density, like something had calcified inside her in the 30 seconds I'd been in the shower. I said her name. She turned around and I saw her face and I understood in my body, before my brain had caught up, that we were done. Not might be done. Done. The expression on her face was not anger. I think I had been, in some stupid, self-protecting way, hoping for anger, because anger is negotiable. Anger means there's still something to fight for. Anger means the other person still cares enough to burn. What was on Colton's face was not anger. It was clarity. Like every blurry thing she'd been squinting at for months had suddenly resolved into sharp focus, and the picture it made was exactly as bad as she'd been afraid to believe. She said, "How long?" Not a question. A sentence that required an answer. I told her. I told her all of it, or most of it, stumbling through it with the kind of disorganized honesty that comes when you've been lying for so long that the truth feels foreign in your mouth. I told her about Kayla, about December, about the dinners, about the texts. I watched her face while I talked and it didn't change. It stayed in that same terrible clarity throughout. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, and I need you to understand that she said this without cruelty, without theatrics, in a voice that was almost gentle, she said, I kept asking you if we were okay. You kept telling me yes. That was it. That was the whole indictment. Not, how could you? Not, I hate you. Not, do you know what you've done to me? Just, I kept asking. You kept lying. 7 words that were more precise and more devastating than anything she could have screamed. She asked me to go stay somewhere else for a few days. She didn't say it was over. She didn't have to. She said it the way you say something when the decision has already been made and the words are just a formality. I packed a bag. She sat on the couch while I did it, not watching me, just sitting there with her hands in her lap, very still, very quiet, her Sunday chamomile tea cooling on the coffee table next to the yellow legal pad with her lesson plan notes. I stopped at the door. I said her name one more time. She looked at me, and there was nothing left in that look that was asking me for anything. It was the look of a woman who had spent 4.5 years learning to trust a person who turned out not to deserve it, and who had just decided, quietly and permanently, to stop. I left. I sat in my car at the end of the block for a long time. Not 20 minutes like some cinematic pause. A long time. Long enough that the light in the living room window went off. Long enough for the street to go fully quiet. Long enough for me to understand, sitting there in the dark, that Derek and Noah had been wrong about everything and that I had let them be wrong because I wanted them to be, and that the person who deserved better in this story was never me. It was always her. It was always her, and I had spent months letting other people convince me otherwise, and now I was sitting in a car on a cold street with a bag on the back seat and a life I had carefully dismantled behind me, and the only thing I could think was, she kept asking if we were okay. She kept asking. She knew something was wrong and she kept giving me chances to tell the truth and I kept lying, and she deserved someone who would not have done that, and that person was not me, had not been me for a long time, and now she was finally going to find out what it felt like to not be with me, and it was going to be better, and that knowledge was the loneliest thing I had ever carried. I drove to Derek's. He answered the door in a t-shirt and said, "So it happened, huh?" And he didn't even look sorry. That was the first night of the rest of what I made my life. Let me tell you what Kayla did when I called her from Derek's couch at midnight and told her Colton knew. She listened. She said the right things, or close to the right things, the things that were warm enough to feel like support but vague enough to commit to nothing. She said she was sorry this was happening. She said she was here for me. She said we would figure it out. And I held on to that. I held on to we will figure it out like it was a life ring, like it meant something solid, like Kayla was a person who had been building something with me rather than a person who had been having an affair with an engaged man for 4 months and had every reason in the world to recalibrate now that it had consequences. 3 weeks later, she told me she needed space to think. I said okay, I understood. 2 weeks after that, the thinking was apparently complete, because she posted a quote on her Instagram about protecting your peace and had clearly moved it into a new era of her life that did not include a recently engaged man with baggage she hadn't signed up for. When I called her to ask where we stood, she said, "I care about you but I think we both know this was situational. I don't think either of us should read more into it than what it was," she said. Situational. She said read more into it. She used the same casual, exits are already built-in language that people use when they want to close a door without admitting they ever open one. I had walked away from a woman who wanted to marry me for a woman who considered me situational. I want you to sit with that word. Situational. Like I was a temporary solution to a temporary problem. Like 4 months of my life, 4 months of active destruction of everything I'd built, were just a circumstance she'd passed through on her way somewhere else. Derek, to his credit, let me stay on his couch for 2 weeks. After 2 weeks, he started making noises about his routine and his space, and I understood that his hospitality had a shelf life, which is a thing you only discover about people once you actually need something from them. I found a studio apartment, the kind you find when you're moving fast and your standards have been stripped down to functional, and I moved into it with a mattress and a duffel bag in about 12 minutes of planning. The apartment had one window that faced a brick wall and a radiator that made a sound at 3 a.m. like a man slowly hitting a pipe with a wrench. I lay there the first night and listened to the radiator and thought about Colton's apartment before we moved in together, the way her bedroom had always smelled like the lavender candles she kept on the windowsill, and I felt something so large and shapeless move through me that I didn't have a word for it. I missed her. That sounds insufficient. I missed her the way you miss a version of yourself that you discarded. She had been woven into the fabric of my daily life in 1,000 ways I had taken for granted and not catalogued, and only now, in her absence, began to inventory. She was the person I texted when something funny happened. She was the person who knew my lunch order. She was the person who left me a note on the bathroom mirror on days she knew I had a hard meeting, not a big note, just a small one, just a few words, "You've got this," or "Thinking of you today," in her teacher's handwriting. I found one of those notes in a jacket pocket 3 weeks after moving out, from a month before everything fell apart. It said, "Proud of you for no reason in particular, just generally." I sat on the floor of my studio apartment and I held that note for a long time, and I thought about the man she'd written it for, the man she believed she was writing it for, and I thought about what I'd been doing the same week she'd written it, and something cracked open in me that has never fully closed. Noah called once, about 2 weeks in, to see how I was doing. The conversation lasted 7 minutes and contained the sentence, "Honestly, man, maybe this is for the best," delivered with the confidence of someone who has never loved anyone enough to grieve losing them. I said yeah, maybe, and hung up and didn't call him back. I don't have much to say about Noah after that. He is exactly who he always was, and I am the fool who listened to him. Derek and I stopped talking around month 2. Not a fight. Just a slow fade, the kind that happens when the thing that was connecting you disappears. Derek had been connected to my restlessness, to the version of me that was looking for an exit. Once the exit was taken and the door was shut and I was standing on the other side of it with no key and no plan, we didn't have much to talk about. His whole worldview required that my story end with freedom and possibility. My story ended with a radiator that sounded like a wrench hitting a pipe at 3 a.m. He didn't know how to fit that into his narrative, so he quietly stopped calling, and I let him. The engagement announcement had to be unannounced. I don't know if you've ever had to do that, tell the people who celebrated something with you that the something is gone, but I can tell you it is its own specific kind of punishment. My parents took the news with the controlled devastation of people who loved Colton and had always loved Colton and were now being informed that their son had made choices that made her unavailable to them. My mother asked me point blank if I had been faithful. I paused 1 second too long. She didn't ask again. She didn't have to. My father said nothing for the rest of that phone call, and I don't think he said Colton's name since, which in its own way says everything. Her family had welcomed me like I was already one of them. Her mom used to text me recipes she thought I'd like. Her younger brother used to send me memes and ask for advice about girls. Her dad had shaken my hand at Christmas last year with this warm, genuine grip and said, "We're glad she found you." That sentence. "We're glad she found you." I have thought about it approximately 10,000 times since. I was the thing they were glad she'd found. I was the answer to a concern they'd had for her. I was, in their eyes, the man who was going to take care of her, and instead I was the man she was going to need to be taken care of from. I never heard from any of them again. I didn't expect to. I didn't deserve to. The wedding deposits were mostly non-refundable. That's a practical detail, but it matters because every check I wrote, every cancellation email I sent, every phone call to a vendor explaining that the event would not be happening, was a small, concrete reminder of the life I had booked and was now unbooking. The venue had a beautiful garden. Colton had cried a little when we toured it, the same quiet happy tears she'd cried the first time we walked through the apartment, the same tears I had watched with vague impatience. I wrote the cancellation email for the venue at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday in my studio apartment with the brick wall view, and I thought about those tears and I pressed send and I stared at the wall for a while after. I saw Colton once, about 3 months out, at a coffee place near the neighborhood where we used to live. She was with a friend I recognized, and she saw me at the same moment I saw her, and for just a second the air between us had that specific charge that happens when two people have a shared history large enough to fill a room. She didn't look away. She didn't look hurt. She looked like someone who had been through something difficult and had come out the other side of it and was now just living, just getting on with it. She looked, and I say this without any bitterness and with full acknowledgement of what it cost me to see it, she looked fine. Better than fine. She looked like a woman who had recently been relieved of something heavy. She gave me a small nod, the kind you give someone you used to know, and she turned back to her friend, and that was it. No scene. No conversation. Just a nod and a turned back in the clear, unmistakable communication that I was now someone who existed in her peripheral vision at best. I stood in line and ordered my coffee and left and walked to my car and sat in it for a while in a parking lot, which has become my primary location for falling apart apparently, and I thought, she is going to be okay. She is already okay. And you are the reason she had to become okay. I started therapy around month 4, same as before, same reason, a morning I couldn't get up and an afternoon I spent talking myself into making a phone call. My therapist was a woman named Dr. Harmon who had this unhurried quality, like she had all the time in the world and none of it was going to be wasted. She let me talk for the first session without interrupting. At the end of it, she asked me one question: when your friends said you deserved better, what did you think better meant? I didn't have an answer. I spent months in that office trying to find one. What I came to, slowly and with a lot of resistance, was that I'd never actually defined it. Better had just been a feeling, a vague, restless hunger for something I couldn't name, and I'd let 2 men with failed relationships and bad judgment attach a woman's face to it. Kayla wasn't better. Kayla was different. Different felt like better because different felt like possibility, and possibility felt like the opposite of the quietly terrifying sense that my life had reached its final shape. But Colton wasn't the reason my life felt like it had reached its final shape. I was. The shape was mine. The feeling was mine. The work of figuring out who I wanted to be and what I actually wanted was mine, and instead of doing that work, I outsourced it to Derek and Noah and let them convince me the problem had a name and the name was the woman I was supposed to marry. Dr. Harmon said something in our 6th session that I think about often. She said, the people who told you that you deserved better were describing a feeling you had. They just gave it the wrong address. I was the address. I was where the problem lived. It had nothing to do with Colton. The rebuilding, such as it is, has been unglamorous. I moved to a better apartment around month 7, one with windows that faced actual sky. I started cooking instead of ordering everything. I got back to running, which I'd stopped during the worst months. I learned, in the grinding, unromantic way you learn things when there's no one watching, some basic facts about who I actually was without the noise. I was quieter than I'd admitted. I was more anxious than I'd acknowledged. I was deeply afraid of stasis, not because stasis was bad but because I'd never learned to sit still with myself without needing something external to generate meaning. That was the actual problem. That had always been the actual problem. I became, in the absence of everything I'd burned, someone I could mostly stand to be. Not proud of. Mostly stand to be. There's a difference, and I am being careful about it because this story does not earn pride. There are things that don't come back. I want to be specific about them so that this feels real and not like a redemption arc with a redemption left out. The wedding that didn't happen. The family that welcomed me and then had to unwelcome me. The future that was planned in color-coded folders on a refrigerator. The woman who wrote notes on bathroom mirrors in teachers' handwriting. The version of myself that existed before I started nodding along in Derek's kitchen, that version is gone too, and I didn't even realize it was worth keeping until I'd already traded it away. My friends told me I deserved better. Better apartment. Better social life. Better woman. More excitement. More edge. More something. What I actually deserved was exactly what I had. A good woman who paid attention. A home we'd built together. A life that was ordinary in the specific way that ordinary means sturdy and lasting and real. I deserved what I had, and she deserved someone who knew it. And those two facts sitting next to each other is what I have to live with, permanently, in an apartment with sky-facing windows, making my own coffee every morning with nobody in the next room and nobody to blame. My friends told me I deserved better. They were wrong. She deserved better. And I was the worst she had to survive.